Hi, hello, and welcome to Shankar IAS Academy's daily current affairs analysis. And today's date is 4/2/2026. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon if you want to receive instant updates. With this, we are moving to the topics of the discussion. The first topic is the gold reserves. Let's see about the top 10 countries which have gold reserves and which position India is in and how it is important in the UPSC perspective. The second is the verses of the grasslands that was recently discovered with the epic Sanskrit text and the Marathi text that came into existence right now, and it is mentioned that the grasslands are no longer degraded forests. And the third is about the Nipah virus, and does it have the potential to be a pandemic just like the COVID-19? The fourth is about the cultural tourism initiative given by the union budget, the Desh, to include archaeological areas as tourism centers. The fifth topic is the prelims focus for the day. Today's first topic of the day is something very, very significant. It's about gold, one of the most important metals in the world. It has so much of intrinsic value. And today we are going to see about the top 10 countries which have gold reserves and why it is very, very important in a lot of perspectives, especially the geopolitical aspect of it. So let's move into the video. So the first one is, what are gold reserves? Gold held by a country's central bank or as part of foreign exchange reserves are gold reserves. So what do they mean? In case you have some amount of gold in your central bank and you are a part of the government, if you are able to use that as a transaction material, as a liability to use, if you are able to use that during times of liability, if you have it as a form of backup, as a form of reserve, it is the gold reserve. If it is in the form of gold, then it is the gold reserve. Now it's used for currency stability. Why? Because all currencies are pegged in relation to US dollar, but gold has intrinsic value and it is not owned by any country. And again, when there is a inflationary aspect going on, gold helps to equalize and stabilize the inflation. And when there is a crisis going on, when there is, for example, the 1991 BOP crisis, during that, gold was one of the most important machineries to stabilize the economy. And again, diversification away from US dollar, because most of the currencies are in the basket of payments, you see they are equated to the US dollar. Henceforth, it is very, very important for us to move away from the US dollar and have some diversification and have our forex reserves or gold reserves very, very in a very, very integral aspect. Now, the key fact is that central banks hold approximately about 20% of all the gold ever mined globally. This is told by the World Global Council. The data source is that the International Monetary Fund has given out the international financial statistics. This is the one which has stated the key fact that we just saw, that approximately 20% of all the gold ever mined is owned by the central banks. Now, let's see which country has how much gold in tons. The first is USA. It has about 8,133 tons, which is getting the first position. Germany with 3,350 tons. Italy with 2,451 tons. France with 2,437 tons. Russia with 2,329 tons. China with 2,303 tons, and India in the 7th position with 880.18 tons. So you see, India is in the 7th position and US is in the first position. Now in between you have about 5 countries. So this is something that you have to remember. And next comes Japan, next comes Turkey, and then Netherlands. So you can just remember that the first one is US and the 7th position is India. After India, you have Japan, and in between there are 5 countries, in case this is asked in the prelims perspective. Then India's gold reserves. Gold holdings is about 880.18 tons, and the rank of India is 7th, as we have already seen. And our gold reserves are managed by our central bank, which is the Reserve Bank of India, RBI. Why is gold increasing? Why India wants to increase this gold? It's because it wants a hedge against dollar volatility, which means that US dollar versus our currency value, that is not a stable value, it is an unstable value. So for stability it wants more gold. The geopolitical tensions, take the case of Russia Ukraine war. During the Russia Ukraine war, the sanctions given to Russia, it was not allowed to use its own currency which was in other banks. It's like you have an account in my bank, but I block your ATM card so you cannot withdraw money. Like that, there were a lot of sanctions for Russia. So that is one geopolitical tension risk, that is weaponization of currency. Because there is weaponization of currency, this is something that you can use in your mains. Because there is weaponization of currency, you need gold reserves. And again, diversification of forest reserves, not just pegged in equality to your US dollars. Now, location of Indian gold is stored domestically in RBI vaults, then in Bank of England, then in Bank of International Settlements. This is where the three places where India stores its gold. Next is Bretton Woods system. See, this Bretton Woods system is where you have to give the focus for UPSC prelims, because if they say that there are gold reserves and all currencies are equated to gold, it's wrong, because other currencies are pegged to US dollar and only US dollar is pegged to gold. That is about $35 rupees for 1 ounce. So even after the collapse of Bretton Woods, gold remains the strategic reserve asset. And in India, we have certain forest reserves. One is a currency asset. Two is gold. Three is special drawing rights. Four is reserve transposition. That is typically 8 to 10% of India's total forex reserves, varies with valuation. Now with this, we come to the end of the first topic of the day and we are moving to the prelims topic. Consider the following statements regarding gold reserves. Gold reserves are part of a country's foreign exchange reserves. Yes. The International Monetary Fund publishes data on countries' gold holdings. Yes, this is also very, very important to remember. If they change this and give a statement, you have to remember that it is the International Monetary Fund that publishes data on countries' gold. India is among the top 10 countries in terms of gold reserves. Yes, which position? 7th position. Under the Bretton Woods system, all currencies were directly pegged to gold. No, they were directly pegged to the US dollar. So which one of the statements given above are right? We know that 4 is wrong. So it should be option C, 1, 2 and 3 only. Let's check. Yes, the answer is 1, 2 and 3 only. With this, we come to the end of the first topic of the day and let's move to the second topic. So the second topic of the day is about grasslands, and today we are going to see about how this has always been prevalent, because we have a common notion that when it comes to grasslands, it is a degraded forest. With this, let's move into the topic. So recently there's a study which was conducted by the Michigan State University. What did it say? It said that it is not a degraded forest, as I already stated, and the grasslands were prevalent. It was ancient, it was natural, and it was always prevalent as it was long believed. Now the evidence is that in 13th century there was a long text that was written, and we had Marathi and Sanskrit text in that, and there were folk songs, poems and sacred writings. With that, there is a scientific correlation which stated that about 44 wild plant species were identified, and in the 44 wild plant species which was present during that particular period, about 2/3 of them were not forest species and they were grassland species. So which states that grasslands were prevalent even during that particular period of time. Now let's see about one important species with an illustrative example, that is acacia. We can see that Shakradhara, he wrote about this particular tree, and he mentioned he mentioned that in his text. Now, when we look at it, if grasslands were not prevalent during that point in time, or if it was a degraded forest, we would have known. But he has written it as a separate entity, as if it was always prevalent and already prevalent. And then the Neera River Valley, the 16th century epic, it describes as thorny terrain and abundant grass. It is closely matching to the present day savanna landscape. So this Neera River Valley is also a grassland, and it also has been mentioned in the 16th century. So we can identify that the grasslands are always prevalent. The next is the wasteland label. For decades, these landscapes, the grasslands were always called as wastelands. Why? It's because wastelands or deforested areas during the British rule, they could not, during the British rule, they wanted to prioritize timber productivity. So these areas were considered wastelands and forests were considered more useful. And the ancient stability is that research shows that it was widespread at least 750 years ago, even before the modern deforestation started by the Britishers. These grassland areas were always prevalent, and other evidences were forest pollen, and they suggested that this may actually be tens of thousands of years old. So, implications of conservation is that the danger of tree planting. First one, grasslands are not failed forests, because we all have a common notion that these grasslands are failed forests. They are not, and this led to a lot of tree planting campaigns. But if you're going to plant trees in grasslands, you lose grasslands as an ecosystem, and grasslands holds a lot of important keystone species in them. So that is very, very important. And the second is the biodiversity loss. Planting trees in these natural grasslands will reduce the natural biodiversity present in that area, disrupt the soil system, and species that are adapted to open environments might get into a closed, foggy environment, which is in the dense forest. The third point is protective endemic species. India's savannas support about 200 endemic species that are found nowhere on earth. So it is very, very important for us to protect savannas. Now we come to the prelims practice question of the day. Consider the following statements. Most of the deserts are found in the eastern margin of continents. We all know that deserts are known for its western margin. The trade wind will not lose most of its moisture when they reach the eastern margin of the continent. So both the statements are wrong. So which of the statements are correct is what is asked. So it should be neither one nor two. Let's check. Yes, the answer is neither one nor two. With this, we move to the third topic of the day. So this topic talks about one deadly disease, and now because we have already faced a pandemic, the Nipah virus outbreak has made Asia be very alert on its toes. And now let's see about what happened. First, the classification. See, the family is Paramyxoviridae and the genus is Henipavirus. The related virus is the Hendra virus. It was first identified in 1988 to 19. I'm very sorry. The first identified is from 1998 to 1999. It is a zoonotic virus, which means it comes from animals and then it's transmitted to humans. WHO has listed this Nipah virus as a priority pathogen, and it has an R&D blueprint. Now, the natural reservoir is that fruit bats, also called as the flying foxes. The fruit bats are the carriers of the Nipah virus, the zoonots. Now, animal to human, it's the contact with infect bat saliva, bat urine, or bat feces might create Nipah virus, and the intermediate hosts are pigs. In Malaysia, recently we've seen an outbreak. It was due to pigs, and the foodborne transmission is due to the consumption of raw date palm juice contaminated by bats. It is reported mainly in Bangladesh and India. Human to human contact is when you have close contact with caregivers or hospital exposure, and and one important point to note is that human to human transaction in COVID-19 was very high. This is lesser than that. It is not as deadly as the COVID-19. So, symptoms and clinical features, incubation period 4 days to 21 days. Major clinical manifestations is fever, headache, respiratory distress, that is pneumonia, and encephalitis, brain inflammation. When you have brain inflammation, it is the most severe form. Neurological symptoms is seizures, altered behavior. You become start behaving very differently, coma or limb weakness, and the fatality rate is about 40% to 75%. The unique feature is that relapse encephalitis reported years after recovery. It is rare, but there is a possibility of brain inflammation to come back if you have gotten the Nipah virus. Now, the treatment is that there is no specifically approved antiviral treatment, but supportive care is the primary management precautionary measure that is taken. The experimental therapy is the M102.4 monoclonal antibody. This antibody was developed in Australia, and the phase 1 trial was well tolerated, but it was not approved. The vaccine is, there is no widely approved vaccine or no licensed vaccine yet. That is the 2026 status, and vaccine development is ongoing under the CEPI and WHO initiative. If you see the India specific context, 2001 in West Bengal, 7 in West Bengal, 18 in Kerala, 21, 23 in Kerala, and 2026 in West Bengal. Public health responses, contact tracing, isolation protocol, and screening at international airports only by Asian countries. Why not a pandemic scale threat is because it is not as deadly as the COVID-19 during transformation, and it has a mostly zoonotic spillover, and it requires close contact. The reservoirus, you know that Nipah virus is in fruit bats. The type is RNA virus. The disease encephalitis is brain inflammation and respiratory illness. Transmission is zoonotic, foodborne, limited. Vaccine is not available. Fatality is 40 to 75%. First detected in 1998 to 99, Malaysia. So with this, we come to the prelims practice question of the day. It belongs to the family Paramyxoviridae. Fruit bats are the natural reservoirs of the virus. Correct. There is an approved universal vaccine. No. No licensed vaccine as of 2026. It can cause encephalitis in human. So 3 should not be there. 1 is definitely there. So the answer should be A, 1, 2 and 4. Yes, the answer is 1, 2 and 4. With this, we come to the end of this topic. So when we think about travel, we all know that everybody loves them. And when we think about the governmental initiatives, there have been a lot. And now the Union Government Budget 2026 is a testament to that. And let's look at Desh. So the Union Budget 2026, in that our finance minister has introduced some initiatives, and they want to position India as a global hub for tourism with excessive focus on heritage and culture. So these are the two major aspects. One is heritage and the other one is culture. Now Desh is development of excavation sites and heritage complexes. It's announced in the 2026 budget, and the objective is that they want to develop the archaeological sites into cultural sites. So we know a lot of archaeological excavated sites. They want to develop that into cultural sites, and once they develop that, it will cover the historical and archaeological sites for preservation and tourism oriented development. This will be refined from the 2021 budget, because earlier in the 2021 budget they wanted to create 5 sites. Now we have moved to creating 15 sites. So this is something that happened in the proposal. We'll look at that in the further coming slides. With that, the transformation of the 15 archaeological sites, as I mentioned, is the first point is the curated walkway. The excavated lands will be open to the public via structured paths. This is first. Second, on-site infrastructure. The scheme includes creation of interpretation centers, conservation labs, and enhance visitor amenities. The second point. The third is immersive storytelling. The use of advanced storytelling skills. Have you seen when you walk through the Red Fort or when you walk through some important monument, they give you a kind of a Walkman which you can put it in your ear and you can walk. It will direct you to that place. It will say go to point one and it will tell the history of point one. When you go to point two, it will tell the history of point two. So that immersive storytelling experience will be there, engaging visitors in their own language. That is very, very important. It is beyond the language barrier. Next, we'll see what are the archaeological sites. In Gujarat, we have Lothal and Dholavira, very important for the Indus Valley civilization perspective. Uttar Pradesh, we have Sarnath, Hastinapur, and Jhansi Fort. Haryana, we have Rakagiri and Agroha. Tamil Nadu, we have Adichalanur, and it is an Iron Age urn burial site. It is very, very important because it is about 3000 years old. Ladakh, the Leh Palace, Odisha, the Udayagiri Caves, Karnataka, Sannati, Rajasthan, the Chittorgarh Fort, and Madhya Pradesh, Iran. So these are the 15 archaeological sites that are under progress for development. The skill development and training is that Desh has a digital component of expansion. That is the digital knowledge grid, the national destination digital knowledge grid. So this grid will automatically and systematically document all the heritage significant locations around India. First, second, job creation. It will create a new ecosystem of employment wherein researchers, historians, content creators, and technology partners will be found. Next, national destination for digital knowledge grid, upskilling guides. A pilot project in collaboration with the Indian Institute of Management, they will provide a 12-week hybrid training course to 10,000 guides across 20 major destinations. This is for upskilling. So you can talk about how partnerships work. The second one is the hospitality reform, wherein the National Council for Hotel Management and Catering Technology will turn into a National Institute of Hospitality, which will align with the hospitality goals. Next is the Purvodaya state, that is 5 major tourism destinations will be there. One in Bihar, two in Jharkhand, three in West Bengal, four in Odisha, and five in Andhra Pradesh. Buddhist Circuit, it is dedicated scheme for the Northeast focusing on preservation of monasteries, temples, and pilgrim amenities. Thematic trails, launch of ecologically sustainable mountain trails, eco and nature trails, turtle trails, and bird watching trails. So all these trails are very, very important in the tourism angle, and this is something niche to India because a lot of endemic spotting will happen in India. Next is the 2020 budget to 2060, 2026 and 2027 budget. One is the iconic site and museum, they wanted to preserve that. Now we have cultural destinations and archaeological destinations. The second is it had 5 sites. Now we have expanded the scale to 15 sites. The key sites are Rakagiri, Dholavira. The key sites are Leh Palace, Sarnath, Chittorgarh. Technology included museums and preservation. Now it includes immersive storytelling and digital pathways. People of Heritage Institute. Now IIM led people, about 10,000 people are going to be trained. Tourism circuits have limited focus. Here the tourism circuits have a lot of thematic trails, and there is also a Buddhist circuit which is going to be present in the northeast. This is the comparison between 2021 to 2026. Now, what are the challenges? First, carrying capacity might be hindered because Himalayan coastal systems may be overstressed by trails. Risk of wildlife disturbance is 0.2, and this might create ecological damage is 0.3. and a lack of accurate digital inventories for heritage sites is point 4. Structural issues is that illegal construction and local mafias threaten site integrity and visitor experience. Risk of poor long-term maintenance due to focus on capital spending over operational spending. Weak center-state coordination and tourism governance. Ensuring quality and scale in training, 10,000 guides is challenging. This again we have to see how the IAM is going to accommodate all these people, and limited stable job. This might be some temporary jobs that they are providing. So stable job absorption for trained youth is difficult. Financial constraints, limited physical space amidst low GDP growth, and absence of infrastructure status for hospitality with private investment. So the way forward is that it should shift from static monuments to AI and VR enabled storytelling. The digital heritage infrastructure, as already seen, it will create a national destination digital knowledge grid with smart management and research. IM-led training, as we have already seen. Sustainable development is ensuring eco-sensitive tourism with carrying capacity analysis. So mains practice question, how can experiential cultural tourism contribute to heritage conservation and local economic development in India? With this we come to the end of the mains topic for the day, and let's move into the prelims focus. So now we have come to the prelims focus for the day. The first topic is about the PLI scheme for white goods. There are 5 companies which were selected under the PLI white goods scheme. So what is the scheme? This scheme offers the incentive that ranges from 6% to 4%. It will reduce the basis on incremental sales for a period of 5 years. The period is very, very important. They might change the period following the base year, and you have a 1 year gap period. That is the 1 year gestation period. Domestic value addition is expected to increase from the current 20 to 25 to 75 to 80%. The objective is to create a domestic component for the industries with LEDs and air conditioners, and to position India as an integral part of the global supply chain. White goods are household appliances that you use for everyday chores, mainly in the kitchen and laundry. It can include refrigerator, washing machine, dryers, and dishwashers. These appliances are durable goods. It is designed to last for several years. White goods, they do not include entertainment appliances such as televisions, home cinemas, camcorders, CD and DVD players. These are all luxury goods which are included in the brown goods category. Now, the humanoid robot ASC Arjun is the second one. This is deployed by the Indian Railways at Visakhapatnam Railway Station. It is fully designed in Visakhapatnam using homegrown technology. It is equipped to assist the intrusion detection through face recognition system, AI-based crowd monitoring, and real-time alerts to control rooms. The features is that there is a semi-autonomous navigation along with predefined paths, obstacle avoidance, and second is the patrol of platforms. Around the clock it's going to be doing the robot. The third one is the effective surveillance it has, while it can optimize the manpower deployment capacity. It has fire and smoke detection system, the fourth point, to enable timely response in emergency situations. So now we have the prelims practice question of the day. With reference to production linked initiative for white goods, consider the following statements. The scheme incentivizes manufacturers based on incremental sales after base year following the gestation period. One of its core objectives is to significantly increase the domestic value addition components used for air conditioners and LEDs. So both the statements are right. The option is both 1 and 2. Let's check. Yes, the answer is both 1 and 2. So with this, we have come to the end of today's topic. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit on the bell icon if you want to receive instant updates. And thank you for watching.